Now, the Telegraph has a story in which the Centre for Policy Studies, which is a right-of-centre think tank, we should say, has costed some Labour spending plans when it comes to renationalisation. Is that right? Tell us a little bit about that.
And the figure they've put on it, which they've calculated it, £176 billion to renationalise these public utilities and the rail companies. And to put that into perspective, that is about the same size as the NHS budget and the defence budget put together.
If it's true.
Well, even if the figure's slightly off, you know, we're not looking at an order of magnitude error. You're looking at something at or near, you know, 100, 150 billion, and that is a massive amount of money. And of course, once again, someone's going to have to pay, and they've calculated that.
Well, we'll certainly be talking to John McDonnell about that later on. Can I ask a little? Corbyn has said that the Carillion collapse marks a watershed in our politics and raises the whole PFI issue. And in many ways, a lot of people will agree with him about that. However, the people who turbocharged the private finance initiative, again, were Labour governments. 75% of those contracts were signed under Gordon Brown.
Let's be clear about this. It started with John Major. You're right. New Labour really took it up. And then over the last 7 years, it's continued on as well. One of my team dug out for me some of the speeches I made as far back as 1998 in Parliament and the articles I wrote. I opposed private finance initiative. Why? I said then, and this is not me being boastful, I'm just telling you what happened. I said then, it is cheaper for us to use the state to borrow funds to fund our public services rather than go out to the private sector. In addition to that, we'll have control and ownership of the asset. I think PFI was wrong, and I said so from the beginning.
The people who were promoting it, of course, said, yes, that, you know, there may be problems with it, but this is the only way, here and now, we can get the new schools and the new hospitals. And that, in a sense, is fair enough, isn't it?
It is. I can understand what the argument was, but it was wrong. It would have been cheaper to... Look, I'll give you the example.
Well, let me give you an example, if I may, because you had a hospital in Hillingdon, in your constituency, and you said then at the time that we've got a proposal for a PFI scheme for Hillingdon Hospital. I am not supportive of PFI schemes, you said, but if this is the way to secure the money, fair enough.
It was the only show in town. That was the point I made time and time again in debates. You are forcing people into PFIs when they don't want them because you're asking them, because it's the only show in town. If they don't go down the PFI route, the patients will suffer. It was terrible decision
making. But this is the absolute dilemma. You are against PFI in principle, but when you get a hospital in your own constituency, you're in favour of it.
Because
everybody felt the same way.
No, it was because we were forced into it, and I had the school in the same position. We were forced into it, and all the way along I said, this is wrong, it will not work, it will cost more.
And now you want to take those contracts back home, you said to the Conservative Party, back in-house. Now, do you accept that involves quite a large upfront payment?
Well, we've already got the upfront payment. The National Audit Office report, if I just explain, Andrew, the National Audit Office report this week said we're now committed to £200 billion worth of expenditure over the next 20 to 25 years. So that money's already there in terms of a liability that we've got. What I'm saying is if we bring into public ownership the special purpose vehicles, equity in these stakes is 10%, the rest 90% is debt. What we could do then is control then and refinance in a way which we would save money. And in the long run, it will save us money.
But the problem that you have got is some pretty savage break clauses, penalty clauses written into these contracts. I went onto the Treasury website and they give an example of one of these clauses. They say the contractor and its financiers are fully compensated, open brackets, i.e. no worse off than if the contract had proceeded as expected. And departments across Whitehall are supposed to use those contracts to do PFIs.
Well, it depends on the individual contract. You take Transport for London, they terminated one PFI, they saved nearly £500 million. There will be some contracts which have clauses like that in there.
Too expensive to get out of.
Well, no, we'll look at those, but Parliament will determine the price that we pay for the special purpose vehicle. That's the first thing. And Parliament will determine the conditions for the future. I've warned against these for over 20 years. What I regret
I'm not arguing with this at all. I'm just arguing about the cost of bringing them back in again.
And what I'm saying is that the advice I'm saying to people, it will be cheaper now to bring the special purpose vehicles into public ownership. Parliament will determine the price. We can renegotiate the terms of the debt that there is now and make it cheaper. That's what a lot of people do in their own lives. They go out and renegotiate their mortgage to save money, and that's what we'll do under this.
Now, another conversation that we have had over the months and years probably is over the cost of renationalisation. And you've never given me a figure anywhere like it. But now one of the admittedly right-of-centre leaning think tanks has kindly moved in to help.
It's more than right-of-centre. It's almost the department of the Conservative Party.
This is the problem. If you won't give the figures, other people will.
Okay.
Now, let's take the example of water. There are lots and lots of voters, particularly young voters perhaps, who look at the sky above and look at their taps and think, why are we paying such a huge amount of money, £86 billion, to a private company to give us water? And they would like water to be renationalised. But the cost, according to the CPS, would be £86 billion.
I know, that's laughable figures.
Too high.
Let's be clear.
Too high?
Yes, of course. Look, let's be clear. The CPS is almost like a department of the Conservative Party. That report was written to a former advisor to Amber Rudd, so it's hardly independent.
But eventually somebody else will do a similar kind of report.
No, what I'm saying is that Parliament will determine the price that we pay.
So 50 billion for water, is that too high or too low?
I think it is, but Parliament will determine the price. Let me just use this analogy, because I think people need to understand the process of it. It's almost like buying a property. We go out and we buy a house in London. The average price is £500,000. We borrow that money from the bank, okay? I then rent that house out. It brings in a rent. So in other words, I borrowed £500,000, but I've got an asset of £500,000, so they net each other off. I put it out, I rent it out, that rent comes in, I pay the mortgage, the rent will also cover a bit of income for myself, but also it will cover a bit of repair, maybe extend the property. That's what we'll do here. We'll bring them in-house. Yes, we'll borrow them money to do that, but the cost of basically the income that comes from those assets will cover that cost and enable us, I think, to reduce price and invest.
Socialism is the language of priorities, somebody once said. As Labour Chancellor, you have lots and lots of call on money, lots of things on welfare, on education, NHS and so forth that you need to find money for. Is it really worth it to spend quite so much money to bring the PFI contracts in early and also for nationalisation?
I tell you why.
Is it worth it?
Yes, I think it is. I tell you why, because at the moment our NHS, our education services, other services are being drained by the exploitation of these private finance initiatives. Look at the National Audit Office report. It just gives one example of schools, 40% above the cost than if we'd borrowed as a state. One hospital, 70% above the cost. Some of our health authorities, they're paying out 20% of their income on the basis of PFI schemes.
You're going to change that. There is one other thing I must ask you about this week, and you'll probably